And that's up in the El Dorado National Forest.
Pretty.
Of course, my favorite part is the dog in the water. But
I think you have to move your head over just a little bit, Mary Beth.
Oh.
There she is.
yeah, she's back there by the rock. She's a swimming pool. Okay, we're ready to rock and roll.
Excellent. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Town of Loomis Public Health, Safety, and Noise Committee hearing of the General Plan Update. Pursuant to Executive Order N2920, certain provisions of the Open Meeting Act are suspended due to a state of emergency in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Consistent with the Executive Order, the 2020 General Plan Update Health, Safety, and Noise Committee meeting will be held via Zoom format. So that's either on your computer or by telephone. If you are participating on your computer, you'll see a raise your hand function at the bottom, which you can, if you like to participate in the public comment, you do so by raising your hand. However, if you're using a cell phone, that raise your hand function is, you can use *9, and it's the same thing. And then with that, Mr. Russ Kelly, would you be so kind to unmute? You lead us in a pledge of allegiance, and I have the flag right behind me.
Great. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of
the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Russ. Actually, I should probably call the meeting to order. That would be appropriate. Okay. Mary Beth?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so at this point, are we going to do the adoption of the agenda?
No, actually, how about we do some roll call?
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty please.
Okay, Danny Cartwright,
Here.
Linda Kelly,
Here.
Russ Kelly,
Here,
John Ireland, Martha Merriam, I know is out, Mark Geyer.
Here.
AJ Moyer,
Here.
auxiliary member Carolyn McCullough,
She waved.
okay, and I don't see Georgianne Curtin. That's for the first committee. Second committee, Paul Bullard,
Here.
Eva Marshall,
Here.
David Ring,
here.
and again, Carolyn is here, and I don't see Jan yet. Okay, we're good.
So I have a Andrea's question. We have 5 members present from the Public Health and Safety Committee. We have 3 members from the Noise Committee. We need 4 for a quorum. So I'm seeking direction.
So actually with that, for the other one, they both have the same chairperson, right? And the same vice chair?
Correct.
So if we count them for the second committee, we've got Danny, Paul.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I'm good.
Okay,
Okay, I overthought it.
Good check.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a quorum.
Okay, proceed.
All right. So at this point, so now we're at the point where we adopt the agenda.
now we're going to go for committee comments not on the agenda.
I'm just so anxious. This is our last meeting, by the way.
Well, it's your son beat today, remember? We know this.
And I'm just so anxious. So
So do you have a committee comment for
Okay, so
items
let's
not
open
on
this
the
for-
agenda?
And
None.
Move to adjourn.
I second.
I'm just following Danny's lead.
I have one, and I'm not sure where this needs to go, but since I know there was an indication to close up our committee You know, we're getting towards the end of our segment. But considering that we've just had the update forum, there's another thing on Saturday. Public comment is until the 30th. I'm just going to say out there, I'm kind of reluctant to bring our committee to a close at the end of this meeting if we get through all of our material, just so we have time to evaluate any further community input. That's my comment.
Okay.
If you'd like, yeah, I can address that. Even as noted on the agenda, this may be, it's a committee determination at the end of the meeting if you would like to continue this matter. In general, other committees that have closed, comments received regarding the element that they were working on will then proceed forward to the Planning Commission under draft review. So we still take public comment. If there's something significant along the way and we feel we need to reconvene the committee to work on it, then we would go that route and pull you back in, have you review it, establish your recommendation, and still let the document continue forward as a draft to the Planning Commission, if that helps anybody's issue.
Okay. All right, so with no further committee comment, is there any public comment for items not on the agenda?
None.
Okay. Now, can we move to adopt the agenda?
I so moved.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
Who was that? Eva?
Yeah.
Okay, let me go for a vote here. Danny Cartwright,
Aye.
Linda Kelly,
Aye.
Russ Kelly,
Aye.
AJ Moyer,
Aye.
Paul Bullard,
Aye.
Eva Marshall,
Aye.
and David Ring.
Yes.
Now we're on to the consent agenda. Do we have an motion to approve that?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I second it.
Okay. Danny Cartwright,
Aye.
Linda Kelly,
Aye.
Russ Kelly,
Aye.
AJ Moyer,
Aye.
Paul Bullard,
Aye.
Eva Marshall,
Aye.
and David Ring.
Aye.
Excellent. So now on to committee matters. And we have Matthew Gherkin and Luke Saxelby. And so whoever is prepared to go first.
We're going to turn it over to Matthew because David couldn't be here, or Luke couldn't be here this evening.
Okay. Well, Matt's on you then.
All right, thank you very much. I am going to attempt to share my screen. Do you see an opening slide?
Yes.
All right, excellent, thank you. Well, members of the Public Health, Safety, and Noise Committee, it is my pleasure to provide a brief presentation and then start to roll through the public health and safety and noise element itself and focus on the changes we made since last time you all saw this. First, we're going to have some slides about ongoing input that we've been receiving. talk about the goals for today, next steps, and then roll through the proposed revisions themselves. I'm not going to read this extremely dense slide to you, but this is representing the ongoing input that we have received from this committee and through the comments that have been going to the town. We've been fastidiously working through those comments, identifying ones that would inspire changes to the element. And we took detailed notes of previous committee meetings. These are reflected on this slide on the this here, and we are incorporating those comments into suggested revisions for the element itself, including both public health and safety, as well as noise. And you see the noise summary of the noise and vibration comments that we have received at a summary level. Here are our links mostly to have in the presentation that you were all provided, so that you have them at your fingertips and looking at the documents, the existing general plan, the revised element, and then the draft settings and the updated settings on these topics. So for today, I'm going to highlight the changes we have made since everyone last saw this element, go through those changes in detail, explain some background around them, hoping to, at the end of this meeting, come to consensus on a recommendation to the Planning Commission for this element. But before that, I'd like to encourage you all to, if you didn't attend the last night's forum, to attend the community forum June 19th, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the depot. If you can, hopefully it won't be too hot at that particular time, and you can get out along with your friends and neighbors and provide additional input, and importantly, encourage those that you know might have input to give but haven't had a chance yet to show up at the depot on the 19th. Continue to submit comments even after this committee adjourns through the email address that's provided here on the screen, as well as social pinpoint, to the extent that comments are spatially specific. Okay, now I am going to switch over to the draft element. Let's see, how do I get over there? Okay, now do you see a Word document?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So we have highlighted, this is the public. Sorry, did I interrupt somebody? Okay, yeah, so this is the sort of.
Oh, Andy, you're freezing.
Well, at least he doesn't sound like Minnie Mouse.
Yes. Although that's always fun.
Okay, I'll continue, and if Andy unfreezes, he can join in. We have highlighted in yellow areas where there have been changes since the last time around, and I'm going to focus the review here tonight on those yellow highlighted areas. I would encourage, unlike previous presentations, I would encourage people to chime in, to raise your virtual hand, to pipe up, provide commentary, ask questions as we go along in the review of the changes highlighted in yellow. And the first thing that I wanted to point out is state law requires a noise element of the general plan and requires that noise contours be developed. That's just maps that show the noise levels at certain distances from either point or line, usually line sources. I'm noting here that it certainly is an option to include those noise contour maps in the element itself, but we're setting up a situation where the general plan has multiple volumes. It's all the general plan, the setting, the policy document, and even the environmental review itself. So we are planning to show the noise contours in the environmental document rather than presenting the noise contours within this policy document itself. Okay, moving along to the next change.
David?
Is it possible, just like if it's going to be in another part of the general plan, can you just put a quick, like where it is, where you could find it? Like, would you be able to reference that right in here, saying, "Oh, it's in volume 3, sections 4." That way, it's easy. If somebody cares, they can go look for it there. They don't have to go searching for it.
Thank you.
Carolyn?
And the bullet point above, Matthew, says the Office of Noise Control in the State Department of Health Services. California has the State Department of Public Health and State Department of Healthcare Services. And when I tried to Google for Office of Noise Control, I could not find one. So if someone could just double check that that really is, and make sure that it's either public health or healthcare services.
This is
Thank you.
This is a quote from state law that is dated.
Well, then I would put the date. I would put government code dated 1972.
Well, I think that we just don't need to quote the outdated parts. We can use dot, 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 and eliminate the things that from our quotation here that are out of date, and the content will be exactly the same. But thank you for that catch. Excellent.
Paul?
Yeah, I was just going to add that the State Office of Noise Control was defunded by Reagan way back in the day, but those guidelines live on. So they were prepared before the office was shut down. So I'm not surprised you couldn't find one. My understanding is it hasn't existed for quite a few years. Just a little background there.
Thank you.
Okay, moving along. So our colleague and friend Christy Consolini developed this language that is what it's what California Office of Emergency Services wants to see in general plans. General plans should incorporate by reference or include the material that would be in a local hazard mitigation plan in more detail. This is the language that is summarizing that material, and we are incorporating by reference the local hazard mitigation plan as it exists today and as it will be updated in consultation with Town of Loomis looking forward. Any questions or thoughts on that? It's essentially explaining what the local hazard mitigation plan is that is a part of this general plan.
Matthew, could you please increase the font size on the screen?
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Way too much, sorry. Okay, there we are. Okay. Moving along. So all this material is deleted and moved into volume 3, which represents the settings reports for the general plan. Okay, so you see a smattering of pretty minor changes to the goals. These are primarily for syntax. This deletion to connote that we care about all wildland and urban fires, not just those on the edge. Let's see, what else is worth highlighting here? Deleting potential, since we're worried about climate change effects, full stop. Adding, oh, so somebody recommended that we add both hazardous materials and hazardous waste, since it's a slightly different topic. Let's see, typo here. And we just simplified the language here based on your previous input to say public health and safety emergencies instead of emergency situations, which was unnecessarily wordy and awkward sounding.
David?
I just had a quick comment in general. I think the numbering system in this section is different than the numbering system in all of the other ones that I've worked on. And so I don't know, because it seemed like it was most noticeable when I got to the implementation measures, because in every other section, the implementation measures had 4 numbers, and then the policies had, the policies had 3, and the objectives had 2, and the goals had 1. And I don't know that they were, I don't know that they're all the same all the way through. Maybe it might only work when you get down to the noise, but just, can you check those, please?
No problem.
Thanks.
And a note to our public attendees, you are all allowed to speak. You don't have to raise your hand, you can just chime in.
So this note is to communicate that we have now, this week, we got access to map showing slopes, percentage slopes in all areas of the town to support policy on limiting vegetation clearance, ground disturbance, and any new development areas with slopes that exceed 30%. And now we know that we'll be displaying a map in the general plan of the slopes, and we have identified that very, very, very few parts of the town overall have those sorts of extreme slopes. But we're going to have a map that shows not just 30% and above slopes, but we'll have other brackets as well displayed in the general plan. Okay, so this is one where we made more significant revisions based on input from committees. So before the language was confusing, this program is about unreinforced masonry buildings, which are more prone to seismic activity compared to other types of buildings. The program was about identifying funding to improve publicly owned buildings that are unreinforced masonry, as well as but there were passing references to privately owned buildings as well. And in these revisions, we have cleaned up the program so that it's clear what part of the program is about identifying funding to improve publicly owned buildings, and what part of the program is focused on economic incentives and relief for improvements to nonprofit and privately held historic buildings that have unreinforced masonry. So that's the essence of these changes. I'm gonna try to show this so you can see how it would. So now it's implement a program to retrofit unreinforced masonry buildings. To effectively implement the program, the town will identify and inventory the town's publicly owned and nonprofit owned historic unreinforced masonry buildings, pursue funding to improve those buildings, incorporate concepts of the state code for historic buildings to provide additional flexibility for preservation of historic buildings while protecting them from significant earthquake damage, and consider appropriate means of economic incentives and relief for nonprofit privately held historic buildings that are unreinforced masonry, such as preservation of non-conforming zoning rights for in-kind replacement of such buildings. Okay.
Can I just say something real quick? It's Michelle Reeves.
Good evening, Michelle.
Hi, I know I'm like the voice from, I was working in Manteca last night at the city council meeting, and I think they forgot I was there, and then I just like inserted myself. I think I was like the voice from above. That's how I feel when I pop in. I just had a quick question on, so inventory of the town's publicly owned and nonprofit owned historic unreinforced. I just wanted to share what happened in Portland, because our city staff in Portland went a little bit hyper aggressive on unreinforced masonry, and they created kind of a list that was imperfect. It was a lot of college students doing drive-bys, and then they ended up saying, well, we want to enforce buildings. Once you create official lists of things that are unreinforced, you start to get into kind of a weird territory around insurance issues and being able to, you know, refinance your loan and your 10-year balloon, you know, just all of these things that actually come with that. And so here's the challenge, is that your market, I mean, one of the questions I would have, I would guess the Loomis market, where Loomis is in terms of rents, I don't know that it would support a full seismic retrofit of, you're not going to get that back in terms of rent in some of your commercial buildings. So you end up in kind of this situation sometimes where it's a little bit of a challenge. And this is the biggest challenge for reuse in California, because energy efficiency code and seismic code, those two things together can make it just really expensive to reuse a building, especially something built in 1900. So I guess it was just kind of curious with this measure, like just being careful about creating official lists of what is not in conformance of something, or what something that is potentially dangerous, because there are a lot of liability issues with that. And there ended up being a huge lawsuit with private building owners against the city in Portland because this list was imperfect, and how you determine whether something has, you know, I guess the third thing that I would say is whether something is conforming or not also can get very tricky in the IBC, because there's different levels of conformance sometimes, depending on the jurisdiction that you're working in. So I don't know. So this just jumped out at me as like, I would be careful.
Yeah, like those are excellent points. And this was a holdover from the previous general plan. And I agree with everything that you've said. And I would just also note that we are in a relatively low seismic risk area. So that's why you see the bracketed little comment that I made to consider actual risk on for seismic events for buildings, actual safety problems, in determining whether kind of the shape going forward of this program.
And that's the thing, is for smaller communities. And so I see this all over Western Oregon, where we have more aggressive seismic code than we do in Eastern Oregon, where we don't have as much risk of earthquake. You know, there's not a lot of funding to support this either. So if you're in a market that doesn't support through your rent the ability to seismically upgrade, I mean, there's literally no extra grants to do this work. You might be able to fold it in some occasions into some kind of historic kind of Main Street grant, but they're pretty rare. So generally the market has to kind of support doing this. And you have this catch-22 in your community, where one of the most beloved things about your community are your older buildings. That's something that everyone mentions, is they like the history of Loomis and they want that to be present. Obviously your wood frame structures are in better shape than your brick structures because they're a little easier to retrofit and they're cheaper. But I would just be careful of making lists. And I always like to think of things as a carrot, like, you know, you want to encourage people to do incremental seismic improvements that will make sense, rather than have like a big stick that you're beating people over the head with, because a lot of times they just won't do anything, and it will be really hard to get buildings to move along. So I think I just get worried about lists, and I think wording that's just, we want to have safe infrastructure and do whatever we can to try and make sure that everything is up to modern day, seismic code. I think you can be a little bit vague to allow yourself some wiggle room to deal with the realities of the market. Because what can happen, and I'm sorry, my computer is dinging. Let me turn that off. What can happen is, if you're in a market where you can't support seismic retrofits, then what people do is they continue to put things that don't require a seismic retrofit, like an auto body shop or some sort of industrial use. And then the building will be vacant for a long time, and then it will get torn down. Like, that's how you end up like sort of losing your historic infrastructure. If your market cannot support these seismic improvements, but you have code or things that sort of are really trying to press you doing it. So as much as possible, we try and create an environment where we're encouraging people to incrementally, like when you re-roof, tie your roof into your walls. And next time you do like a big facade thing, then you can start putting in your moment frames. And so trying to really encourage people to do things incrementally and to think about carrots versus sticks.
You're not suggesting that we get rid of this whole thing, the whole implementation measure altogether?
No, I think
Okay.
it's just how you word it. Like I said, I mean, literally we were in a situation in Portland where they were going to require everyone to put a sign on a building saying this is a seismically unreinforced masonry building. And then, but none of that had been confirmed or not confirmed. It was just this random list that was created by some PSU people that the city had commissioned. And then we started getting, like, in the lawsuit, and this was in front of a federal judge, and the city actually lost. It got very complicated. Like, what does it mean to be seismically upgraded? Because there are different levels, at least within the code in Portland, for instance, of seismic upgrading, and the city kept moving the bar of like what that meant. And there's kind of the seismic, like in lay people's terms, there's seismic retrofit that stops the building from falling over and crushing someone, which is how a lot of people actually die. They start fleeing a building and it falls over and it crushes people. And then there's the seismic retrofit where the thing like is in perfect condition when the whole thing is over. And so in Portland, they kind of recognize that there are these two levels of there's like, we're gonna eliminate injury, and then there's like the perfect retrofit and the building is not damaged and actually can be reused again. Like, those are two different levels. But then what level got somebody off the list, that became a huge point of contention in the lawsuit. So I just like and I 100% agree that our goal is to get all of these buildings up to modern day building code, but then we just have the reality that it's very expensive. And if you're in a market where rents are $1.25 a square foot per month, like, you can't afford to do that as a property owner. You can do it over time, but you can't afford to do it overnight. And what we were seeing in Portland is the second they came out with that list and people had to start acknowledging in some public way that these buildings were not safe, and that was being acknowledged by a government, then insurers were like, we're not going to insure your building, and people couldn't refinance their building. So if you're interested in saving these buildings, that is like the worst thing that you could possibly do. So it just became it was actually just there were all these mechanisms that the city could have used that would have been positive, but for whatever reason they kind of went after this clubbing people over the head, which didn't end up well. So I think that I would just think about language that is maybe a little less list oriented and more just, we really want, like, it's our goal in the city to have seismically, upgraded buildings. And we want to work toward that in terms of like trying to find grant fundings, making it a priority for beloved buildings in the commercial district, or that, have some historic reference. But I'm just going to tell you, it's really, really hard. It's super expensive, and it's, most of your downtown, for instance, is probably not going to support it. And if you're really interested in seismically upgrading your buildings, I think thinking about how you can create a phased approach to it for owners is really, really helpful. So I'll give you another example. In Portland, I know for a while when we first started retrofitting older buildings in really derelict, high crime districts, they would do things like, if you replace the roof, you would have 10 or 15 years in which you could make this family of seismic improvements. So you could do them over time. You didn't have to like absorb all of that cost all at once, for instance. So I think there are ways to tackle these things that work a little bit better. So I'm not saying you should get rid of it, but I think it should be maybe slightly more vague and aspirational, but I think this is a document you need to be careful about having details in, because they come with like very high dollar sign obligations and numbers.
So I think getting rid of the list like what you have done, Matthew, is I think okay, where you get rid of the list, but everything else stays.
I think when that was put in, it was initially to just get an idea of how many buildings we're really talking about. Because I think right now that's kind of an unknown factor. So, I mean, is there someplace else down the road as far as, recommendations of it would be nice for you to have somebody to go out and identify these, but not that it's necessarily, written into,
This is
or
one
have
of
an
those
unofficial list.
Yeah. So I was on I was the chair of the Metro in Portland, the Metro Brownfields task force. And this is a very similar situation. So when you want to go out and talk to people about their property potentially being a brownfield, like they're not super excited about identifying that, because the second you identify it, then you bring about a host of possible actions that you have. So it's this constant catch-22 with this kind of work. And the hard thing about trying to identify that, so from the outside, you can look at a building and look at its age and look at the material it's built from. And you can look for certain kinds of cues to see if any kind of incremental work has been done. So you can kind of eyeball some things, and you can either say it's had seismic work, or maybe it was built, things built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s sometimes had a lot of rebar, sometimes had a lot of reinforcement, sometimes things were done in concrete. So you just don't know. And so you can guess, but a lot of times you're wrong. And that's where it gets tricky. And then when you start engaging an owner and you start saying, well, I want to know if this is an unreinforced masonry building, it is not in their best interest to talk to the city about that, because then it's official that they now have an unreinforced masonry building. So that's just one of the tricky things. So if there was going to be a list, I would almost want it to not live at the city, because then it's an official sort of actionable item. I would wonder if the Historic Society or something could start to document not unreinforced masonry buildings, but maybe what they could do is document, I would probably start with just buildings that are made from brick or concrete block, or you could just go through the list of the kinds of buildings that typically can end up being URMs, but aren't always, or maybe they had some retrofits, you don't know. But maybe somebody could start a list of just understanding what your historic brick structures are, what your historic concrete block buildings are, something like that through the Historic Society. And from that would give you a proxy to have an idea. And those are the ones that are more concerning than your wood frame buildings. So a lot of your older wood frame buildings are also not seismically improved, but those are they're a lot lighter lift to actually complete the seismic improvements.
Yeah, so the program already did not involve any privately held list at all to be identified, so that's non-issue. I'm striking out this first part. I'm suggesting to strike out this first part because I don't think it's critical to the substance of the program anyway, and that's just inventory public-owned, nonprofit-owned buildings, and just basically leave the balance of the program potentially with some additional language on encouraging incremental improvements over time, along with planned improvements to buildings. So a building comes in for some kind of entitlement that is going forward for totally different reasons, and the town works with that applicant to identify ways to make seismic related improvements along with that other entitlement, maybe some language along those lines to add. And I think that we've covered essentially everything that has been raised here.
Okay, so two things I would just, and I'm just throwing this stuff out here for you guys to discuss. I'm not necessarily, I'm just trying to give you some benefit of some of what we've gone through. So the two things about that is the same thing applies if you're doing that with just public infrastructure. You know, you are kind of identifying some of the issues that, you know, now the public, you know, for the buildings they own will be potentially on the hook. And again, those things can be expensive. And I'm not saying that you don't want to do those things, but that's why I don't love lists. And that became one of the really big points in the lawsuit is the private sector people were saying, like, you're not improving, like our I-5 on ramps and off ramps that go into the Portland and 405, none of those are to seismic codes. None of our bridges across the Willamette River meet seismic code. Like, you know, it sort of went on and on and on. And they're like, you can't, so that's, it just becomes a challenge. And I would say that nonprofits are still private ownership of buildings. And they're the people who are actually least likely, because they're generally have some sort of social goal with the ownership of their building, so that they have the least amount of financial ability to complete these changes. So so again, just things for you guys to talk about and consider. It's just once you create an official list and say something is unreinforced masonry and it's officially recognized by the city, you can never, there's no take backs, right? That's now on a list and it's been acknowledged. And there's a host of things that come with that related to lending and liability that you don't get to take back. So you just want to be careful about it. And that's true whether it's public or private sector.
I'm okay with the deletion of that one particular line. And as Matthew is noting on here, the encouragement of incremental improvements. I'm okay with that.
Okay. Anybody else on that note? I've also made a note to myself. Maybe it ends up being in the environmental impact report or in the updated setting to highlight actual relative seismic risk with regard to this topic. So like I was saying, Lewis is in a low seismic risk area, but I want to maybe try to put a finer point on that as it relates to these types of buildings. Everybody good with the changes that we just outlined?
Looks good, Matt.
Looks good.
All right, thank you, excellent.
Before you scroll too far, if you go up a little bit, the heading for this section was wildland and urban edge fires, but you got rid of edge in earlier. I'm not, if you are trying to stay consistent, you might want to, yeah.
Thank you, good call. We have added Penryn here where we could, where we're mentioning South Placer Fire District because there is a small part of the town that's covered by Penryn.
We had a conversation in the last meeting about this too, and we in the last committee, we thought that it would be better to not state them by name, but just say the administrative fire districts. That way, in case they change, we cover everybody who's still around. But this is a different committee, so if we want to keep them all in there, that's up to you. I personally like just saying whatever the prevailing fire district, because that way if it changes, we don't have to add Penryn or whatever it is, whatever we split into or merge into.
I agree with Dave. We need to keep it more generic.
Matthew, I'll send you what we have.
Oh, thank you.
From that meeting.
Okay, excellent. Well, last time we talked about another committee also pursuing Firewise community designation. That's, I understand, implementation measure, PSF, such and such. I suppose we don't need it in both locations, and I think that's more related to public facilities and services than it is our purview here, but I am open to input on that topic. And actually, Christy, you are the overseeing, your staff to that committee, right? So maybe you have a comment.
Right. And I'm, there are some people on this committee who are also on that committee. So we did mention that it's also covered in here. It's up to the committees to determine, to me, if they want it here and the other one. I don't have a problem with that, and I can share that language with you. I'll put it in the chat.
If it's not shown here as an implementation measure, though, we can show it in the introduction to this, that this is a related measure in the public facilities element, so that it's not lost when it comes to this document.
Yeah, there has to, I have to believe that there are multiple implementation measures from different elements that all deal with the exact same thing, or very, very similar things that they're in the different elements, and you have to be referencing them, cross-referencing them. So it's fine, I think, to leave it in both, as long as you have a procedure for doing that. And it's,
yeah, it would be a procedure of not making it a policy in here, but saying, this policy is over in the elements, so just be aware of it. Yeah. So it's really one to make sure you don't forget it if you're just reading one element and not the other.
It's the exact same language I'm seeing. So it's the same implementation measure, just in two different places.
Okay.
So once we consolidate all of these elements, that's one of the tasks we have, is through making sure that nothing is duplicated.
Hey, Paul, what's next? Or Matt, excuse me.
Oh, I'm happy. Paul, you want to take over the rest of the presentation?
Sure. Move to adjourn.
Second.
You sure that's what you want?
I have a hard time hearing some. Let's see if this helps. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Excellent.
So question in the chat from Carolyn: what happens if they do not maintain a fire safe plan? Anything?
A FireWise community, you just become decertified. The thing that could happen is California Fair Plan and Farmers Insurance gives discounts on homeowners insurance if you're in a FireWise community. So what could happen is you would lose, the individual property owners could lose their discounts, but there is no punitive actions if you don't maintain the FireWise community.
So just to be clear, this is exactly the language that's in the public services facilities element. And so the plan here would be to delete this from the public health and safety element and insert in the introduction or somewhere in the narrative a cross-reference to the existence of this implementation in the public services facilities and services element, right?
That's correct.
Anybody disagree with that? Okay. All right. Excellent. Moving along. Okay, here's the next change from last time. In the narrative introduction to the climate change resiliency subsection here. In addition, climate change resilience and adaptation are considered as part of overall planning efforts for all resource areas addressed through the general plan, particularly in fire, flooding, emergency response, and preparedness subsections of the public health and safety element. This occurred to us because, when you get down to the climate change resiliency objective policies and implementation measures, you might be left wondering, well, wildfire risk is something that is changing with a changed climate. Water resources too, et cetera. There are other topics that always have been related here, and we're just trying to make that connection to say, hey, this is not everything the town is doing that's related to climate change adaptation and resilience. See also related policies on fire, flooding, emergency response, et cetera.
My only change to that would be the element itself. Public health and safety is now called public health, safety, and noise.
That's an important change. We should probably track that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Health, safety, and noise element. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. Continue to work with county service organizations, provide for cooling centers during extreme heat events. Oh, yes. Okay, so that's a good question from Christy. So this is policy. It's not implementation. I think the essence of this thought is, well, it might not be the town. In fact, it likely wouldn't be the town itself that is constructing and identifying and providing cooling centers and healthy air quality centers. It would be the town is working with other organizations to do this. Christy, right? That's your clarifying question.
Yeah, the town is already coordinating the county on some of these efforts.
Yeah. I'm gonna make that change. I hear somebody pipe up here. That's good. So you've probably picked up on my new brilliant highlighting scheme here. Blue means now is beyond yellow. Now we're into blue. Changes made after this committee got together. Suzanne, you're keeping me honest on all this, right? You're gonna put in our notes something that I missed to highlight.
As an aside, it was very difficult to read all of this because I couldn't tell what was new and what was not new, because as the version in all the other ones, as the versions change, the new stuff was underlined, and everything else that was from version, say 3 or for version 2 to 3, those changes were gone. So here I had to look for what else was different, and it was very difficult to understand your color code as I was trying to go through it the second and third and fourth time.
Can you add a color key to the beginning of the document?
Well, I mean, so what we're moving toward here, and I'm sorry, David, yeah, you're right. And actually with the track changes themselves, I think it's very difficult to read. So yeah, this time around, we tried to highlight in yellow what changed. But looking forward, and Mary Beth, Andy, Christy, tell me if I'm wrong, we are going to accept all these changes and have a brand new, beautiful, and format the document too, so that it's legible. And therefore we have like a fresh new document that incorporates all the changes, and you're not seeing the changes anymore. You're just seeing what the committees have collectively blessed.
That's correct.
So I'm looking at just the file name. Is this for still version 1 then?
It's shown as version 1.2.
Okay, that's what I thought. So then that's why everything is underlined, is because it should be, because this is, it makes sense.
Yeah, there were just so many changes that I didn't want to totally, when I shared this back with y'all, I didn't want to get rid of all of that quite yet. I guess based on the depth of changes, I wasn't comfortable just accepting quite yet.
I was gonna say, if it's gonna stay like this for another for a little bit longer, then maybe, like Eva said, if you had something that just said a color chart. Blue is what's changing this for this time. Yellow is what's changed between May and June.
Hopefully this will get passed and we won't have to worry about the colors.
Right.
Right. The colors will go away when this is cleaned up.
So this is a similar, I think, very good observation Christy's making, that similar to the cooling centers, it's the town. I mean, we say working with others, but this is already happening. So I think maybe the revision is to make it clear that the town will continue to partner with those groups rather than the town itself trying to budget and staff and provide for emergency preparedness type services.
I want to think the intent of this was establishing some type of a committee, some key people that would act in that interface with other, I mean, if I'm recalling correctly.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I hope
it was an establishment of some type of key personnel.
Yep.
Can we go back to the shelter? As I'm looking at this, it says that we're supplying filtered air during unhealthy days. I don't know how that's possible when in fact our schools don't, they have us open the schools or close them during bad air days. So I normally, when I think about emergency places, I think about Memorial Hall, like that doesn't, it has a air filter system, but I don't know that it could be functional to have people in there on bad air days with the system that's there. I just don't know whether we could actually do that or not, or we have to upgrade that, or, if that's the case, why do we let the schools out on unhealthy days? So that's just my comment there.
Matt, could in a policy that you're amending right now, to ensure, and to Russ's point, about filtered air, I'm not sure we can ensure that. So could we make that less committal and to say to the effect of just help provide? So help, yeah, there we go. There we go, yeah.
I want to say provide because I didn't want it to be on the town to put in the annual budget.
Yeah, I wanted something, yeah.
What about help identify locations where filtered air may be available or something to that effect?
Partner with real.
Usually what the state did when I worked emergency preparedness on hot air days and smokes, they provided masks like we did for COVID for extreme bad smoke to the long-term care residents. And they provided little portable air filters. So I would offer, Russ makes a good point, the town will be committed to providing filtered air. And that's a lot of money to retrofit a building for filtered air and maintenance too.
Matthew, can you remind me what our overall objective is not specific to air quality under this policy, correct? It's essentially emergency shelters in the case of some sort of an emergency situation, correct? Can we generalize to some extent so that it is about air? It could be about flooding. It could be about other extreme climate or emergency situations, correct? I mean, do we want to generalize here a little bit? And it's really about identifying locations to provide services as needed, and the gamut that perhaps we have an array of opportunities depending on what's needed.
Yeah.
Comment, excuse me, comment in the chat from Carol. Normally, these emergency shelters, et cetera, are managed by the county. Perhaps coordinate with the county to provide these measures.
Yeah, we could. Yeah. We have been reviewing it's called the Placer County Sustainability Plan. I think it's called Sustain Placer.
And the local hazard mitigation plan.
Yeah.
And trying to borrow language where we could, but I think in this case, there wasn't any more sort of definitive language to borrow there, at least that we could come up with. I think that's a great idea. But we sort of struck out so far on that topic. And yes, but I appreciate the comments. I think they're all excellent. Maybe this is one where we could say, I understand the comments. I understand that for some structures, it's not just buying a fancy filter. You have to go and seal the building in order to really provide the requisite air quality, indoor air quality. If you're talking about an older building, a lot of times. And I understand that it's other agencies' purview, so we don't want to overextend ourselves, get out in front of our skis here. Maybe this could be the one. Maybe this could be one of those ones where we can say, we could be comfortable as a committee saying, we have provided direction to staff to make revisions to this program in consideration of the limitations of the town's ability to actually themselves provide pristine air quality. What that means, the definition of that is difficult, changes over time, could be committing to too much. So staff revise this to be more generalized, talk about identifying locations for and coordinating provision of emergency shelters that provide such qualities as high quality indoor air conditioning, respite from flood events, some more flexible language. So that would be like a sort of a direct staff to make revisions in response to those comments rather than trying to make them in line here live before everybody in this Word document.
Can't we just say partner with relevant organizations and agencies to coordinate emergency shelters, period? And then, not go into what kind, that would help during poor air quality days, 100-year flood, or whatever it is. I don't know if we need to be so specific.
I agree with that. Just make it very generic because each emergency is going to be so unique.
Yeah.
We were just acknowledging that we might have places here in Loomis that would be an emergency shelter. Depending on what that emergency is, we will adapt at that time. Because at the end of the day, the emergency shelter is just to get people there to be safe, whatever the emergency is. Nice. Yes, Matthew.
So we don't care that they provide any services, they just have a place to go.
I agree. I think if people know that there's a place to go, depending on the emergency, they know it will be provided. We don't have to be so specific. Well, we have to have filtered air for this. We have to have.
No, I agree. I agree with all that. I don't know that just providing a shelter is enough. Like if I guess it's just the way what I'm thinking. Like a shelter, I'm thinking is just a place to go, and
It's a safe place. That's all it is. It's to account for the people. It's to account for who's ever being forced from the emergency. So you can go ahead and get Red Cross to talk to them and acknowledge where they are and move on, hopefully someplace safer.
So then the town is not responsible for coordinating with anybody with the Red Cross company.
It says partner.
It says that.
It says partner with them to provide the shelters. But if
Partner
we
with
want Red
relevant
Cross to come in with the
organizations.
services, then we would have to add that here.
Partner with relevant organizations and agencies to coordinate provision of designated emergency shelters.
And I say and requisite services
Needed.
pursuant or for the.
I think the details of that might be getting a little too far into the weeds, and we should maybe leave that to an emergency response plan.
You know, David, typically whenever I've been out to a scene when we're going to fires or we're doing something like that, the Office of Emergency Services makes all the coordination with Red Cross, with Salvation Army to come in and bring food. And so if we generalize and do that, we will coordinate with our local agencies to provide these services. They already have these things in place. Typically when we head out there, they've already, when PG&E shut off the power and we had cooling centers, they had already coordinated with the county. They had the memorial hall set up for these locations. So I agree with Andreas that if we don't have to get in the weeds with making our own policy with resources that we do not have, but we partner with agencies that, such as the county and the Office of Emergency Services that have all these contacts, and we just have a point of contact within our town to the Office of Emergency Services and then coordinate what's in the best interest for our town.
I have a proposal on this of just adding and assist with relief efforts as needed for various scenarios, various emergency scenarios. Assist with relief efforts as needed. Would something like that work?
So I think you have a model, Carol, that the response for the power outages when they did that over by Taylor's. I'm not familiar with how all that went down, but that looked pretty organized and orchestrated. I'm not sure who was involved, but it looked like it played out pretty well as far as having a model.
I think that was the county that came in and did that. But I like what Eva put on there. I think it's not too much in the weeds.
The Taylor's, the emergency shelter Taylor's was put up, and then it was moved to the Memorial Hall.
Yeah.
So it had better efficiencies at the Memorial Hall and better abilities to provide services for other things.
Still.
At the end of the first sentence, designated emergency shelters and services.
That I would be fine. Because because then we're coordinating with somebody that says the services are there.
Yeah.
Because right now with just shelters, we're saying you can use Memorial Hall, whatever you want. I know that you're going to do something with it. Whatever it is, we've done it. We've done our job by saying here's a building for you to use. But if we then if we say no, PG&E or whoever else is doing this, the county's doing this, they're also providing services there at Memorial Hall. Then I feel like that's what we should have been doing in the first place, was saying, yeah, we know that there's something there for us to. It's not just here's a building to go to. It's here's a building to go to for help. And then along with the, I don't know that the town should. I would hope that the town would assist with the relief efforts, but I don't know that we. I don't know that I don't know that needs to be in there. That last little bit that Eva added.
So a period after available?
Because it's that kind of requires, if there's
volunteers.
A big fire, for Sean and Mary Beth to be out there directing traffic. And I don't think that that's what we need to happen.
But if we need manpower, it's going to ask the town to help, right, David? So maybe if we say and assist with relief efforts as available. Right?
If we're going to put that in there, then it should be at the end of the previous sentence, because that sentence is all talking about providing notification. And
yeah, it was intended to be up at the first sentence.
And assist, even if you said where, not necessarily where possible, where feasible, with or assist, it's okay there. I'm not totally against it. If we left it like that, I would be fine. But I'm not 100% happy with it. But I don't know. I don't feel like we need to spend a ton of time on this. Is the thing? It's just. I'm afraid that like I said, that's almost requiring the town staff to assist, even if say, one of their family members is in trouble. This feels like it's saying that no, you have to abandon the town is responsible for doing this. So we need everybody. It's the town staff is responsible for the way I'm reading it.
And in certain events, the town would absolutely not be charged with relief efforts.
Mark?
Well, we're kind of searching to stay out of the weeds and kind of make not too specific, but make it responsive, I suppose. Just going with what's highlighted there in green, where it says partner with relevant organizations and agencies, coordinate prison and services. So, I mean, I think that has flexibility with it. The reality with a lot of those agencies is they're going to come in with some type of a plan that the town is going to support. If you try to parse it a little bit too more specifically, you're going to start raising all the questions that we've been doing for about the last 10 minutes here in terms of like just having too much specificity. This applies for flexibility, just looking at fairly general, I think.
I think and services covers it.
Okay. I agree.
I concur with that.
Okay. I'm detecting consensus. Everybody good now? Please let me know if you're not good. I keep forgetting to specify. I want to hear if you're not okay. Okay. Moving along.
I have a quick comment on 4131. Did you mean for that to say adaption? In the third line down. Climate change resiliency and adaptation recommendation.
Yeah.
Is that so? Did you mean to say adaptation? That's the question. I had to look it up. I didn't know what adaptation meant. And adaptation, the definition is adaptation. I just thought you misspelled something, but I wasn't sure if you meant to say that or not.
Oh, no. I actually, adaptation would be better. Or maybe just strike this.
No, I think it's intended because the difference between the resiliency programs from the LHMP versus the adaptation recommendations from that same plan.
So Mike, I'm fine with that. I was just wondering because adaptation, I had never heard of that word, but it oddly means adaptation. Like the definition of adaptation is adaptation, and I was like, that's weird. I didn't even know that was a word. Okay. Sorry for taking 2 minutes to do that.
No problem. So let's see, this actually, I don't know if this changed a lot. This is based on recommendations from last time. Somebody has already shared the intent. It's just to have dedicated people responsible for working with the relevant emergency service agencies, tracking available resources, reaching out to schools and other establishments that have spaces that could appropriately serve as emergency shelters, memorandums of understanding with such entities to streamline emergency response when needed. Does this seem consistent with the intent by which it was offered?
Anybody? Comments?
That's an implementation measure for the policy that we were just talking about. Is that right? Yeah.
Next policy. So this was added. Critical facilities collaborate with local utility service providers to ensure that new critical facilities, including communication towers, are able to withstand severe weather such as heavy rains with lightning, hail, and high winds. Okay. So this is, Suzanne, I think you're saying this used to be a policy, used to be called a policy, but it's really an implementation measure. And then we cut it down to focus on actions that are implemented by the Placer County Environmental Health Department. And so these are existing requirements, county requirements as the designated CUPA. What's that stand for again? I don't remember. Anyway, it's the local agency that's designated to be charged with regulating hazards and hazardous wastes. So this is existing law, and we're just reiterating that.
Mark, could you discuss your memoranda of understandings question?
Well, I'm just nitpicking. I was an English teacher a long time ago. I think the plural of memorandum is memoranda, not memorandums.
Okay. That's where I thought you were going with
I to see some lawyer go with some technicality and it costs the city like $1 million or something. So
Are we just looking for an English teacher?
no, I'm retired from all that.
But I think maybe it's the last meeting. Was it the last meeting we were looking for an English?
And Matthew, it was memoranda of understandings. There you go.
Thank you.
So Mark, we'll engage you with Andreas, determining if we use the term will, shall, should, may. That always is a general plan question.
I prefer words
You don't
like
have to pluralize
reasonable.
understandings. Go back up.
What was that, Andres?
Understanding singular. Memoranda of understanding, not plural with an S.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this is, these essentially also are existing requirements for demolition involving lead-based paint or asbestos materials. To conduct an assessment and, if necessary, to remediate in compliance with these existing regulations that are the purview of EPA, OSHA, and the Air District. Okay. Would this be another, let's see. So we added reference to these specific organizations. Town will work with South Placer Fire District, the Sheriff, Placer County Emergency Operations Division to implement and update the local emergency operations plan. But maybe that was not, oh, that was an edit that Christy provided for us.
That would be another place where you would just talk, say the administrative fire. Yeah.
Well, the sheriff's office is going to be around.
But the fire, and yeah, the South Placer Fire. Isn't the Penryn Fire District also in there though?
Yeah.
So you either add Penryn or generalize that one.
I generalize that. Take out. Just put.
The local fire district.
Yeah.
The language that Christy said that they have from public facilities and services, and use that generalized language here too. So new implementation measure. Evaluate bridges and culverts, seek funding to improve them to minimum standards, maintain waterways clear of debris in order to ensure clear passage of flood flows.
Are those standards defined anywhere?
Is
Yes.
Local bridges and culverts, does that just cover the roadways that are maintained by the town, or does that, we have some roadways that are private roadways that have bridges, and there's more than one party on the other side of the bridge, and the fire department refuses to go down there because of the capacity of the bridge and the fire truck. So I don't know that we would be responsible for bridges that are private roadways.
Okay.
If you just add public.
Should I say town maintained or town owned or
Public.
This was derived from a policy in the annex for the local hazard mitigation plan from the town, specifically the town of Loomis annex to that county plan. Just as an FYI, it came from the town's input to that county plan.
So if the fire trucks don't go down over those bridges, that has to increase the insurance of the property, right? Like, how do they know? Does the fire department tell?
The fire department.
Carol wrote in the chat that for bridges, typically we follow Caltrans standards, and they perform tests and notify us if there are standard issues.
Does that also apply to privately owned ones?
I do not know.
No, privately owned, they're privately owned, so no.
Yeah.
You don't
Okay.
like other standards.
So I don't think that we should be evaluating those. The town should not be evaluating. I mean, we don't, but.
Well, on some of the stuff we do, say like on Saunders, there's culverts, and we have a property owner that wants to put in a railway bridge, and he wants to put a driveway across it. And we do have standards that, we use, we have private, not private, we have contracts with engineering firms that these when they want to do this, they have to turn their plans in with all the calcs, all the structural calcs, et cetera. We send them to our consultant, who then does all the analysis and stuff like that before they're allowed to put a driveway or anything over culverts. So while they're not per se typical, not town of Loomis standards, they're standards that are Caltrans standards, because this has to do with anything next to the roads, and there's specific engineering standards, and they talk about weight, and they talk about weights of vehicles. And when we approve something like that, it does go before, typically, to the fire department, and they assess whether or not they will bring a fire engine across it. So there is a great deal of review. I don't know enough to know how we put this in our standards, other than to say that this is all analyzed and it's all evaluated and approved and that kind of stuff before we're allowed to issue somebody an encroachment permit to put a driveway over a culvert.
In this case, this policy is just for public bridges that basically you're going to look for money to fix up existing public bridges and to maintain them. That's what really this says.
Yeah.
And it's not dealing with private or how they're constructed or anything else. It's just the town's going to look for ways to keep their bridges updated and up to standard.
But I have a question though. I mean, because this is public safety and this is our general plan, should there be some type of reference, you know, private property, you know, bridges or culverts need to be town approved, or, you know, have to go through some type of a approval process before they're, you know, constructed? Because it is a safety issue if the fire department's not going to go out there.
Oh, so Carol's not sitting there right now, but if
Carol, where are you?
yeah. My guess is where the town is reviewing these bridges she's discussing that are private bridges are when they're asking for an easement on a town road going onto their property, possibly across a town culvert or town ditch. And so therefore the building codes and the inspection is required. But if there is a bridge on totally private property, there's no requirement for the town to be engaged in that process.
Yeah, and Eva, what you're saying, what you're asking about is already required through the process that Carol described, and we could try to characterize that here in this implementation to say, I mean, this implementation is proactive, like the town will do this. There's also the reactive part that Carol was talking about. If somebody needs an entitlement that's involving one of these types of structures, the town's not going to issue that entitlement until it's demonstrated that all relevant standards are met. And that happens anyway, regardless of what this general plan says. But we could still add something, a clause like that, if it's the pleasure of the committee.
Well, I mean, a lot of times as a resident coming in, I know when I first moved here, the general plan was kind of my go-to in guiding me on what I thought I could and couldn't do. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I understand that there's the town perspective, but there's also the resident perspective. We're talking about public safety and what are we covering here? What are we telling our town people about our public safety? And so that's kind of why I'm thinking just some type of a reference that should be included, you know, private properties, you know, I don't know, need to go through the town's process or, you know, follow this town procedures through the planning department. I'm kind of at a loss to how to throw it all together, but you guys understanding my point?
Yeah, the issue is when the town is, like Matthew said, when the town is issuing an entitlement, that's already taken care of. And I think where it gets fuzzy is where there's no entitlement required, you know, for the town to basically force itself onto a private property owner. It is difficult to deal with.
We just say something to affect that if private bridge is necessary over a waterway, that it needs to be approved so that emergency access vehicles are capable of passage.
I like that.
I hope you got it. I can't say it again.
I'll go ahead.
I just have a question. Is the town aware of any private bridges that are not up to the standards that the fire department would cross them?
You know, for the most part, Paul, you know, we have a couple properties that have erected bridges to a side of their property that did not have any buildings on them. And they have been told that they are not allowed to construct any type of a structure on the other side of something where they do not have a bridge. For the most part, if it's over waterways, we have to go through the purveyors of water, which is what, Fish and Wildlife.
Army Corps of Engineers.
And they have to approve these things. And we did have a property that had put up a bridge that was substandard, and it was required to take it down because a lot of these rules, they supersede our powers, other than we have to put it into place that we have to see the approvals from all agencies involved before we can issue them the permit to build, because all bridges require building permits, and we're not allowed to issue a building permit until they have the approvals of various agencies. And that's not per se us coming in and taking personal property rights away from somebody, but it's to ensure, number one, the safety of them, but number two, to ensure the safety of the water system, because if a bridge fails and it degrades the side of a waterway, we've got issues way downstream that affect our conservation of resource issues in waterways.
And that's a great answer. Thank you so much for that. I was assuming that, you know, the new construction would be required to meet certain codes. I was really just curious in case my friends on Barker were to ask,
exactly,
you know, are our bridges okay? Are we going to have trouble with emergency services coming down our street? Thank you for that response. And it makes perfect sense.
And just so you know, I do live on Barker. And the bridges there, you know, we've had emergency vehicles go down them, and, you know, and big old giant horse, you know, heavy duty type of stuff. But if we cannot touch those or the waterways unless you get permission from the Army Corps of Engineers. And I don't know how long ago those were put in, but they're pretty substantial, heavy duty stuff. But again, it's a private road. The town doesn't own it. We have to maintain it. And it's been a real headache for all of us.
You know, when somebody wants to do a lot split, and there's a waterway on their lot split. If we do not have permissions from the waterways in order for them to even have the ability to construct a bridge, they're not allowed to. We can't subdivide the property because we cannot provide a property that is not, you know, that you cannot access.
Right.
I think that looks pretty good.
I agree.
Matthew, you do an awesome job keeping track of all the conversation and condensing. Kudos to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
It's a lot of processing.
So I think
I just have one quick comment about that. I just not done thinking about it, but that whole implementation measure is regarding the policy for emergency evacuation routes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to make sure that the public bridges and culverts are available and they're free from flooding for people to evacuate. The public, the private ones, I agree, should be kept up to standards, but I don't know that if it's a private road, are we responsible as the town? I agree with the sentiment, but are we responsible as a town to not maintain, but to ensure that the private roads are passable in an emergency?
No, that's left up to the property owner.
So I agree that I agree with what you're trying to say with that last sentence. I don't know that it should go in the emergency routes. So like definitely bridges should, I mean, that's more like a circulation type of thing. I think, I mean, unless you're talking about making sure that the bridges and culverts apply with relevant standards in regards to getting out of town quickly, evacuating, then fine. But I don't, it sounds like
Well,
it's
I mean,
more of a keep them up to standard so so they're safe.
I mean, we are in a location, we have a lot of rural, large properties. I mean, how many fires have been put out in Loomis? You know, and the access that the fire department has for that.
Okay, I'm okay with it then.
I mean, that's where my concern is stemming from, is the emergency access to firefighting, especially with a hot summer coming up.
My only question was, should I say something like, should I qualify this? So, like, I'm sensitive to Eva's comment.
That's kind of getting too detailed, Matthew. You know.
Yeah. Okay.
How about with all relevant agency standards? Since we're dealing with the Army Corps and, you know, their state, federal, local.
So I was just feeling sensitivity to Eva's comment that the general plan is a clearinghouse. So it is a legal document, of course, mostly. It's a vision document, does lots of jobs, including helps to explain to the average citizen, you know, what's required for doing things in the town. And so I was just thinking, oh, maybe we qualify that a little bit so the average citizen can get a clue on, like, oh, well, what standards are you talking about? Oh, safety and natural resource. Oh, I see. Probably Army Corps, DFW, and whatever. I mean, it's a small point. I can leave it, take it or leave it. It sounds like Anders thinks that's too much detail, and I'm fine with that.
I like general plans to be general, Matthew.
All right. I'm persuaded. So I think we pretty well extruded that one out of this committee. Excellent. Thank you. And now, Luke, take the reins. Oh, Luke's not here, so I'll do it. No, here is where Paul could take over totally. Again, the language you're seeing deleted is moving over to volume 3, the settings sections. Okay, now again, highlighting what's changed in yellow here. So to David's comment from earlier, yeah, we realized that, I don't know, we're going to have our document production wizards fix the formatting so that the numbering scheme is consistent in this part of the element. I couldn't figure out how to do it.
I had a question on the 1.1.1 policy. It says new commercial industrial developments. There's a part of me that when I'm reading this, like, do we want to include new businesses too? Because there's a lot of, you know, there's a turnaround within businesses where it's not just new development. It's businesses coming in as well, that come in with a different industry than what was originally built. So there's a part of me there that's, you know, do we want to include developments and businesses? I'm not quite sure where to address that aspect of this. Because I know we've got you know, was on King and Swetzer, where there used to be the old bread store. And, you know, now it's a dye company and they work 24/7 and we hear them at all different times. So it's just a change in what that facility was used for.
Yeah, change of use.
it's a change of use. So do we want to incorporate that into this as well, or does it belong somewhere else? I don't think it should be limited to just new commercial and development.
This is only dealing with roadway traffic. Well, no, I'm sorry, roadway and non-residential. Sorry, okay.
Paul, go ahead.
So here's my understanding, and the way that we've been operating as noise consultants for a lot of years is that the general plan is a plan for your growth or your development within your jurisdiction. And I believe within the noise element, there is a policy that says you need to update a noise ordinance. So general plans, our understanding and the way we look at it is that they deal with new things, the general plan policies. And then you have a noise ordinance that deals with conflicts between existing uses, EVA, which would be those uses that are already there or that maybe they've made some change. And compliance with the noise ordinance is not optional. And so long as there is a reference in the general plan to say, hey, let's adopt the noise ordinance. And ideally, the noise ordinance would have consistent noise standards to the general plan, because all kinds of problems happen when they're not. But I think that's where you evaluate conflicts between existing uses is in the ordinance, not necessarily in the element. But Anders, Matthew, I welcome your thoughts there.
Well, the zoning ordinance has to be consistent with the general plan. So it is important to have a policy in here, and I haven't reviewed these specifically, but to talk about, definitely you have to have a noise ordinance that would, apply to entitlements in the town, all kinds of entitlements.
So I'm agreeing with you, Eva, it needs to be covered. And I think that from our experience, the appropriate mechanism has been an ordinance for existing uses and an element for the planned new uses when they're being evaluated by the town for general plan consistency and everything else, so that both sides are covered.
That is correct. That is right. I mean, that is typically correct. All the way you characterize the general plan is for new things where the town is exercising its land use entitlement discretion on approvals for new developments. And the ordinances, the code of ordinances or the municipal code is what dictates the change of use, existing uses, nuisances. Even without a change of use, somebody starts operating differently without no change of use. They don't need generally an entitlement from the town to do that, but the nuisance related elements of the ordinance would apply to that situation. So good question, but I do believe we are covered here. Mary Beth, did you have something else to say on that topic?
No, I was just going to go down the road of the noise ordinance in the zoning code that regulates change of use and, new business coming in to an existing facility and how they comply with the noise ordinance. Certain things, like in the ILT, you might need a minor use permit just to regulate that, hours of operation and things like that. But yeah, it's covered.
Okay, so there was a lot of redundancy in the previous element, and you'll see a few little yellow highlighted areas that I've called out specifically where I say, wait till you see this brand new awesome implementation measure. We don't need a lot of this material anymore because it's all in one spot instead of peppered out throughout the element. So this is just one of those. It's one of those instances about outside 65, inside 45. You're going to see that elsewhere. We don't need to keep saying that over and over. Here I'm suggesting transit is not a noise problem. The headways aren't dense enough where it's an issue. So I think we can delete this policy.
Everybody okay with that?
That's currently, right?
That's what?
That's currently it's not an issue.
Currently not an issue.
It's not going to become an issue in 1 year.
I cannot imagine a situation, especially with the electrification of buses that's already mandated.
Okay.
You know, and that's not something that can be regulated at the local level anyway. The state motor vehicle code says how loud vehicles on public roadways can be. So can't really establish a standard that's more restrictive than what the state already establishes.
Good point. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. So a number of policies and implementation measures have been consolidated into this big omnibus implementation measure, which is all about what happens in reviewing new developments and improvements to vehicular transportation facilities. So there's an acoustical analysis that identifies all the requisite noise sources, the responsibility of the applicant for private projects by a qualified professional, or acoustical consultants, LLC. That includes representative noise measurements, sufficient sampling periods, characterizing existing conditions, estimating existing conditions and plus project noise levels, and recommending appropriate mitigation, as well as construction noise effects, where that's relevant. I'm putting in here where we're talking about intermittent single events. We should talk about possible sleep disturbance as well.
I agree.
And then we start to get into the order of preference of how to reduce environmental noise exposure. This is consistent with what was in the existing general plan, actually, and it was just reconstituted in this more comprehensive implementation measure.
They're
so
also
with,
listed in one of the policies, policy 115. So I don't know if you meant to have them both listed in the same place. I'm sorry, listed twice and listed in two different places, or if you meant to, if you were trying to combine them.
Yeah, for now that was intentional. I would be happy. I mean, it is sort of a policy decision to say here's the order of priority. So perhaps this could be deleted here.
The policy is less wordy, less verbose. So if you're gonna, I think they should only be in one place. My personal opinion is that they should only be one place. The two down, 115. There you go.
Oh, right, yeah, right.
So I think if you're gonna be real descriptive there, then that's probably better. And then go back up and put that up in the policy itself.
So let's see. What's the best option here? Maybe, okay, maybe. I'm thinking I remove this as implementation because it's more of a policy. It's saying what's better than what else, you know?
Right.
So I'm thinking maybe I remove this language and put it in policy.
Move the language instead of removing the language.
Yeah, move it up here. This is good. It's trying to be more concise, but maybe we have a slightly more detailed policy and it's this material.
Agree.
Anybody have a problem with that?
Do it. I don't have a problem with moving it, but I was looking at the listing that you have.
Yeah.
And those are all items that exist today. There's emerging technologies at all times that can do things that these things can't do. And I think we should put that as an item as emerging technologies make changes to sound deadening that we look to use.
I think I don't know how to spell surveillance.
Maybe
So
it's
I
like
think-
if there's an emerging technology or available or a new technology available, you could leave it up to the council to where to put it in that order.
Okay, I like that.
With consideration of emerging technology. With future.
And just along the lines of what to do, the two sentences previous to that. So you're talking about, so it says where the noise source in question consists of intermittent, that if you're going to move it, if you're going to move what's in blue, then those two sentences should go away. Sorry, I jumped topics.
This
So that-
sentence also should be.
And the previous one.
I'm not sure the previous one should come out.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
that's.
okay, hold on. No. Okay, I see. But or maybe that should go in with the policy.
I think of it more as
Is that an implementation?
detailed implementation.
Okay.
It's a close call though. So I'm going to make that move and then draft some language that creates flexibility relative to new technologies that don't have an issue with that? Okay.
Nope.
Awesome. So here's more duplicative implementation language about qualified acoustician, buffers, walls, etc., acoustical treatments of buildings. Which is now structural measures. Wait, actually, let's see, acoustical treatment of buildings should be in there somewhere. Okay, this material has been deleted in favor of the more comprehensive implementation.
So I see a reference up here to the municipal code at the very top there, Matt. I think maybe that speaks to Ava's question.
Oh, right,
earlier.
yes, excellent point, yes.
And as a really side note on this one, it looked like this is terrible, but it looked like the font or the size is different, and I'm sure it bothers no one else, but it was hard. It was just you throwing a wrench in as I was reading all this stuff.
I know I tried to catch as much of that as I could, but you see it down here too in different places. This is why I can't wait to move on to actual version 2, where everything looks beautiful and all the tracking is gone. Here's another instance where information is superseded by.
Okay, can we go back up? I think it was, or do we have, no, numbering change, I'm sorry. We haven't got there yet. 116.
Okay.
I had a comment on.
Okay. Before we get to 6, I just wanted to note, I'm sure you all are following every move of subcommittees in the California Assembly and Senate. But if not, there's a bill called AB 43 that seems to be zooming through essentially that like speed limits, how speed limits are set is crazy. To make a long story short, there's a survey of how fast people are actually driving, and then the speed limit is set at the 85th percentile or something like that. So if you have a bunch of bad drivers, then you might have bad speed limits. And this law would allow for speed limits to be set not just based on how people, like the design speeds, how the roadway was designed and engineered that makes people feel safe driving too fast. It would allow for considerations on circulation needs, pedestrian, bicycle safety, and I'm putting in here transportation noise exposure as well. So once that law passes, that's why I wrote in consideration of legal constraints, because it's not a done deal yet, but it seems to be zooming through. There may be more flexibility for the town to set speed limits, taking into account these other factors.
I'm a huge fan of that. I don't know how everybody else feels, but it would be nice for the town to have that authority, and rather than rely on that 85th percentile speed thing, because it seems like a creeping standard with people driving faster and faster. The 85th percentile is always just going to keep going up. So I like this.
I agree.
Matthew, have a question. How many more? Because the council's asked us to, and these are 2 hours that they become too long.
Sorry.
And so the question is, how much more is there? And have the committee make a decision. Do we continue or do we reconvene?
Yeah, there's a fair amount still to go.
Noise is the last one, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I got my share comments.
Yeah, I have a couple comments. And also, I noticed that Danny left. Is he back?
I'm actually with Linda right now because my internet connection is
yeah. I saw that you left and I was like, wait a minute, he was part of the noise committee's quorum, and if he's gone, then but you're back. Okay. You never left. You just okay. Yeah, I think we might need to continue this because we're not going to get through it in the next 10 minutes.
I don't think so. But I think Eva had a question about 116 and maybe just bring it up.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, is it possible for the noise committee to just meet, or that because we the other committees, or are we all together now?
That's your call as a total committee.
Okay. We're a subcommittee. We're not the whole committee.
Oh, we're a subcommittee.
Yeah.
So is noise separate or not separate?
Noise was combined with
okay, so we can't go ahead and pass the first part and then do the noise separate and then pass it next time or whatever. Okay.
Matt, can we turn off the track changes just for a second to see how much is left? Because I think the bulk of it are really those last two tables that are referenced in that one big implementation measure. There may not be as much left as, I'm just curious, because there's the first table, 8.3, which deals with transportation noise. And then there's 8.4, which deals with non-transportation noises.
Yeah, I think we can get through it. Let's just really buckle down and do it.
Let's power on.
I mean, there's a lot of highlighted parts in here still.
I don't want to rush anybody. I was just curious as to how much was remaining. I personally don't want to speak for the group. I would prefer to stick around another 15 or 20 minutes to get it done tonight. I don't know if I'll be available with vacations and things coming up for an additional meeting, but that's just my perspective.
There was I would like to stay, but I think that there was some stuff that Matthew, I think, was going to go back and still change stuff. Like he is like, I just took, like, it seems like you made comments to saying, this is the direction we want to go. and you're going to bring back some later, or are you?
No, this is later.
Okay. All right. Then I was misinterpreting your comments on the side.
I know for me, I have about a work tolerance of about 2 hours, and then I start going into some brain fog. So it's difficult for me to work beyond 2 hours.
Let's just get going quick, and if you have comments to make on what he's saying, make them quickly and move on. But I think we can finish this. Like Paul said, it's summertime. I don't want to be committed to another meeting. We can do this, you guys. We can do this quickly. Yeah. I know we can. Good minds and good people. We can do it. Okay.
Eva was on 1.16, right?
For me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, repeat what you said?
You said you had a question on 116, right?
Yeah. And I'm not sure where this should really go in. If it's on one, I think that's where it should go. Posting designated areas, times prohibiting jack truck brakes. I would like to see the town put up some signs in those noise sensitive areas that are against, industrial in close proximity of residential, to see some type of identification of quiet zones placed, especially along Switzer. And, you're talking about potential building on Sierra College and around. I think there needs to be, an implementation of putting signs up, identifying quiet zones in the sound sensitive areas.
It's not unusual to see signs that say truckers, don't use engine brakes in this area or something.
Well, it's not just that, but, living in close proximity to the ILT zone, we've got people back here, they're pulling into a business and they're blaring their radios, or they're just coming back there to hang out and cruise and party sometimes. Some of these businesses like to get up really early, especially in the hot summer days, that start their businesses at 5:30, and you're hearing that beep, 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 beep. And it's like, hey guys, I don't want to be the bad cop around where I live all the time. But I do enjoy my yard and I like my quiet time. So before 7:30, after, I think it would be helpful. I don't know if it would deter the drag racers on Switzer when they pull into the cul-de-sacs back here and want to have a little side party.
So that the implementation measure says post designated areas and times, but it doesn't say where to post them. So if you want, that could be online right now. And so it should be, I think it shouldn't be online. I think if we could put signs up, I think that would be a good idea. So maybe post, like if the wording says to post, maybe post signs in designated areas.
I'm good with that. I think the noise standards, you're not advocating for a different set of standards, hopefully, for different parts of the town. I mean, the standards are use dependent, but the creation of like a quiet zone, Eva, I could see how that getting really complicated. It's like these standards apply in this area and they're different than the standards that apply elsewhere. I think with the standards that Luke has come up with and the committee have come up with, there is going to be that protection in place that maybe is not as thorough now, or that maybe is ambiguous now. So I think that's going to be covered. I don't think signs are a bad thing though, to just sort of remind people that we have neighbors in the area. But you mentioned like creation of a quiet zone. I think that could complicate things.
Well, I know I've been in places where, and maybe it's something that businesses need to do. But I've been into business complexes, and on their back fence where you have a residential backyard, there are signs posted.
Yeah. Or
Like I said, I'm tired and it's very difficult for me right now. So that is my 2 cents. I can't work out the details right now.
No, we don't need to do that. I want to gauge consensus though. The other thing this reminds me of is like where I live downtown, Midtown Sacramento, you see little signs in establishments on the way out that say something like, hey, be courteous of the neighbors. You know,
exactly.
When you're leaving this restaurant, you don't need to yell at the top of your lungs, you jackass.
Yeah.
Sign says all that.
Does the sign really say that?
Well, I can't remember the exact.
Or, you know, yeah, be
language.
respectful of our neighbors. You know, I don't know.
I think if we change it to saying post signs in designated areas, or maybe along designated routes.
And could those areas be just determined down the road? I mean, they're here as a implementation measure, or do they need to be spelled out exactly where at this point?
No, at this point, I mean,
I think anything that encourages courtesy is a good thing. So
yeah.
I just don't know if it needs to be pinned down exactly where those signs should be within the framework of the general plan. And I would back that effort with you, Ava.
I tend to agree in the general plan. I don't think it needs to be in the general plan. We're talking general. And so I think I agreed that it'd be too hard to have a quiet zone, but I don't disregard that we need to have something possibly to encourage people to be courteous, you know, with what they're doing.
Especially in those areas where you have close proximity, you know.
Well, even maybe you and I could go to a town council meeting and bring it up and discuss it and see how we get the ball rolling on getting some of those signs installed, you know? I think that's probably what it'll take.
Because the paper one from the baseball guys blew away last winter when it rained.
Okay.
Anyway, but no, I mean, the fact that it said that they were designated post designation areas, designated areas and times for the jack trucks, I just thought that was a good place to interject that comment. You know, my understanding is the general plan is what we want to have create for the future. So that's a future project.
Okay.
What's up next?
So I'm thinking of creating some language along the lines of what we discussed, and consistent with these notes. Any objection to that?
Nope.
Hearing none.
No, appreciated.
So this has been. Oh, this is already law reference to the noise installation standards. It's in the municipal code, not necessary to repeat it here.
Mm-hmm.
I hear more instances of how future development coming in will be reviewed, as you saw in that big, long, yellow new implementation measure. Same here. Repetitive information that's been superseded by that new implementation measure. This is not new. Construction equipment differentiate damage. Okay, so oh yeah, so this was a comment from last time. This has to do with vibration sensitive projects. So we decided to follow the Federal Transit Authority criteria to ensure that ground-borne vibrations do not exceed acceptable levels. In those standards, there are different standards for annoyance to vibration sensitive receptors versus a vibration that could actually damage structures. So I thought this general reference would be okay.
I think it's good because it covers a whole lot of stuff within the FTA authority guidelines, which are kind of the industry standard. So.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Oh, here's just a question from me. So now we're talking about noise sensitive uses and stationary noise sources, not transportation, not mobile sources. I'm just noting that 50 decibels is extremely quiet, and the ambient noise level in most places, many places, could be higher than that. So I'm asking, should we increase this to 55 at nighttime to at least 50? Or should we handle it the way that I have in this new footnote to say, if the ambient's already higher than the standard becomes the ambient plus 5 if it's 60 or less, or 3 if the ambient 60 to 65, or 1.5 if the ambient is more than 65. So it's a way to deal with, whoa, 50, that is really quiet, hard to achieve. Ambient probably already exceeds that in a lot of places. Okay, what if that happens, then what to do about it?
My feeling is that footnote 3 needs to remain regardless of whether we bump those standards by a few dB. I don't think it's a bad thing to recognize, if Luke's done the community noise survey and it shows that the community is really exposed to typical levels of 55, then that's what people are used to, then that's probably where the standard should be set. That's sort of the rationale for doing the community noise survey. So I wouldn't have a problem with changing those to 55 and 50 for daytime and nighttime. Those are still very conservative standards, but your footnote 3 would still cover it. If you've got a high noise area, it would allow for a higher standard.
I'm kind of on the fence on that one because at night it's extremely quiet, especially when you get into the more rural areas. Has anyone tested what our ambient noise is at night after 10 p.m.?
Luke he's done a community noise survey, and presumably he used that to develop these standards, Matthew, but I'm not sure. That would be a Luke question. But
yeah, I don't remember the details, but except to say that in many of the locations, the ambient conditions were exceeding these standards. Not in all locations, but in in more than one of the locations, I was seeing that.
Daytime I can accept. The nighttime I have a little harder time with.
that's reasonable. Maybe bump the daytime to 55 and leave the nighttime alone. And that would be, I think, consistent with the state's recommendations from way back, anywhere kind of right in that range.
Mm-hmm.
For most of the sound survey, was that mostly done in the urban part of town, or was it all over Loomis? Because there's half the town is very rural.
I think in our first meeting where Matthew presented and Luke presented the background information, I think there was a figure that Luke had that showed where he had done the measurements. Right. And I think it was a pretty good cross section of the town.
Was it? Yeah, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
It was Luke had about 5 or 6 locations where he had set up the sound reading equipment, and he had spot readings throughout days. And so he was able to aggregate his readings into a composite for our overall. So it was a pretty sound and comprehensive reading.
And it was all over the town, not just in the residential, not just in the city part of town.
It was in locations where you could monitor railroad traffic, Sierra College traffic, Highway 80 traffic, Swetzer Boulevard traffic, and then inside of a neighborhood too.
He has 2 points that are on the southeast side of town. And then about 5 or 6 points on the northwest side of town.
I don't know. I'm gonna defer to Paul on this one because you're the expert, but I'm wary of increasing the numbers. But if you say those, it's okay.
Looking at in that table that you just scrolled by there, Matt, you look at the daytime LEQ values, you've got 75, 58, 71, 62, and we're looking at establishing a daytime standard of 50. So I think there is some room, and that's based on 24-hour measurements, not just a spot check here and there. The nighttime levels, as you can see, the average levels are also elevated, but these are, these are next to some noisier areas. If we go up to the previous table, let's take a look at this one. Because there you've got kind of tucked back in H. Clark Powers. And these are all daytime levels. So there's not a cross section of, I don't see nighttime levels in the more sensitive spaces here.
Mhm.
And he's putting the max at the horns, when the trains go by. Obviously, I mean, what is it when the train is not going by? Because the train is going to, in itself, going to, skew the numbers,
Right.
in my opinion.
Well, the footnote 3 does, if the goal is to say, hey, we want to maintain as quiet a community as possible, then you leave the standards as they're in there with the 50 and the 45. And you use that footnote 3 to say, we recognize that some parts of town are louder, and in those areas, the standards will be allowed to increase. That would probably be the safest way to go. The noise standards are basically a line that's drawn in the sand between, everybody would love to have 25, but then you inhibit commerce, right? There's got to be a balance that's struck between people needing to do business and trucks making deliveries behind Rayleighs and things of that nature, and protecting people's desire to not have high noise levels in their backyard. So this is a reasonably good compromise. And in my experience, and I have a lot of experience in this area, 50 and 45, 70 and 65, that provides a lot of protection to the residents of Loomis. Those are on the lower end of what we normally see. Loomis has got a lot of rural areas, as Eva mentioned, so maybe those are appropriate, but we know when we're next to a highway, next to Sierra College or the freeway, that the levels are a lot higher.
Yeah.
Mark?
Good.
Got to push back. Do we have a lot of noise complaints right now in the town of Loomis? I mean, how pervasive are the complaints concerning this?
I know of one continuing complaint from the ILT district on the residential neighbors to the west.
Okay, so if we don't have a lot of problems right now with where these are, why are we going to fix it if it's not broken yet? Leave it where it is. We can always go back and adjust it later. Err on the side of caution.
Okay, I'm just looking at future development. We're talking about industrial businesses coming in. And I'm trying to protect, people I know that are going to live in that area.
No, what I'm saying is that if maybe there's two different questions that I'm not understanding it. If Paul says that right now that the standards are pretty robust, then fine, then leave them where they are, in my opinion. If there is a concern about future developing someplace where there is already a higher level of noise that's not going to be acceptable to those people who are going to be living there, or when a new business comes in, that's a different question.
Yeah, I think I agree with Mark. I think what Mark is saying here is let's keep the standards lower.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
If there's not a problem currently, and there doesn't seem to be a problem with the lower standards. Nobody's advocating for making them even lower than what they are now. But
no, I don't want to increase them though.
So let's leave them where they are. I'm okay with that.
No, clearly my opinion is leave them where they are, because we're just, if they're low enough, then it gives us a certain amount of protection, and the onus then is going to be on somebody else to prove some type of exception to whatever it happens to be. But the general plan at low levels is going to protect us.
That's where it'll happen. If somebody comes in with an application to open some type of a commercial enterprise, they would be required to meet the more restrictive noise standard. So they would have to implement more noise mitigation. Is essentially how that would work.
And that's only if the ambient levels, if we keep footnote 3, and that's only if the ambient levels are so low already.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I would like to see it at 50, stay at 50. And then I think that the footnote 3, like you said, covers where it's already issued. Yeah.
Any objection? Hearing none. Eva, sorry.
I'm good now.
Okay. Let's see if there's anything else here.
I do have one thing. This is different because it's in my head and I didn't write it down in my notes to what the number was. There was something I read. Oh, I think when it had to do with leaf blowers. Whenever we get to that part. There was a, or is that not in there anymore? I was trying to keep up.
It's right there.
Where are we at? Oh, okay. So it's not actually, well, comment on that one. Duration. And I know the commercial properties, we've had issues with, going 2 and 3 hours on commercial property on a Sunday morning, starting at 8 and going till 10 o'clock all morning. And it's because they're clearing their commercial property. It's resolved itself. I mean, we've talked to them about it. But I'm thinking that we probably should include some days or non-op days for commercial property when they're supposed to be non-op on Sundays anyway. So I think that kind of needs to be included in here.
Would that go under an implementation measure, or would that be better suited for the ordinance? I'm not disagreeing with you at all. But usually there are hours when you're allowed to use leaf blowers, for example, not before 7 a.m. or what have you.
Well, no, I mean, businesses want to keep their properties nice too, and I get that. But it's like, there's got to be a time when it's like, okay.
But I'm just wondering where the best place to put it is.
Okay.
That sounds like more of an ordinance type of location. Because right, that the policy says we're going to limit the use.
Right.
And then the ordinance would say this is exactly how it's going to be limited.
Correct.
I think it'd be better vetted in an ordinance kind of public hearing so that people could weigh in from different angles. Because that's a hot button topic for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And there was one other one that was like right underneath it. It had to do with deliveries. There was the word of daytime for deliveries. And I think that needs to be more defined. It was just daytime hours. I mean, daytime these days starts at 6:30 in the morning. It's daylight. We're listening to people at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning with backing up trucks, and it's
actually, I think the ordinance already states that it's 7 a.m. to I can't recall, because I know in Costco
10 p.m. right there.
Yeah,
specific limit. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if that should be incorporated into that little statement.
There it is, 7 to 10, right there.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Now, this isn't saying that truck deliveries can't occur at night, but if they are going to occur at night, they're subject to the more restrictive nighttime noise standard. So it makes it very, very difficult to have nighttime truck deliveries, not impossible.
Excuse me.
Correct.
Actually, doesn't that say that they can't? Unless there's no feasible alternative?
Limited to daytime hours. And it was just a matter of defining what the daytime hours were. Because that's constantly encroached on.
Yeah, the policy actually
says this actually does say it.
Okay.
Yeah, 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. And, maybe you just put that in parentheses, daytime 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. just so it's there as well.
I don't want to do that. Once you duplicate something, if there's a change at some point in time, then I've had too many issues with that.
All right.
Maybe just make sure it's in the definitions.
Okay.
That should be in the glossary, and that's appropriate. So Christy, if you can make a note, we need that added to the glossary.
Thank you.
I think we're getting really close to the end.
I think that is the end.
I
That's the end, right?
One more, let's see.
Yes, that is the end.
Okay.
Excellent.
We
See,
added-
that was worth sticking around for. I didn't want to pay another $3,000 for a meeting for 20 minutes. We have to be fiscally responsible at some point.
Good job, team.
Thanks for sticking around, Ava.
That's hot.
Mary Beth, did you want to post on the chat or just announce the motion?
Yeah, as long as everybody is totally okay with this document moving forward and the committee assignment ending, I have a proposed motion. I posted in the chat. This is a motion of the Public Health, Safety, and Noise Committee to forward our recommendation for goals, policies, objectives, and implementation measures for our committee's assignment as modified by today's meeting. This committee recognizes that this completes our task at this time and that we have an opportunity to participate in the Public Health, Safety, and Noise Committee element review by the Planning Commission and Town Council of the draft 2020-2040 general plan update.
So moved.
Second. Where's Carol?
I'm right here. I'm talking. Okay, who it is? Who made the first?
I did.
Danny.
Danny. Okay, who made the second?
I did.
Linda.
Linda. Okay.
Andres, can the chair make the motion? Yeah, okay.
We did in our last one.
Okay, let me find my
Yes,
paperwork.
that's perfectly fine.
Okay,
Are we
thank
ready
you.
for this roll call vote?
Yes.
Okay, Danny Cartwright,
Aye.
Linda Kelly,
Aye.
Russ Kelly,
Let's do this.
Russ go away.
Rest left about 40 minutes ago.
Okay, got it. Linda, no, AJ Moyer,
Aye.
Paul Ballard,
Aye.
Eva Marshall,
Aye.
David Ring.
Aye.
Okay, that's all of us, guys.
That's just one question. I didn't call my name there.
I miss you all the time, Mark. I'm so sorry.
I just want to make sure I had to be here for
really
2.5 hours.
Mark Geyer, are you here?
I didn't need to make the motion or second, but I got to be in the minutes for the vote. Okay.
Okay, Mark Geyer.
Thank you.
So one last question before we go. When, Matthew, I know you're going to do your magic with this documentation. When will that be available for us to look at? Or is that between you and Mary Beth to planning department?
I was going to say, as soon as Matthew has it available and provides it forward, we will redistribute it to the committee. So you
Okay.
can look at the complete text.
And you'll send us that. You should just have an email when that's ready.
Yeah.
Send a link.
Yeah.
Yeah, should be less than a week.
All right.
Okay, Matthew, thanks for keeping up with us. A lot of chatter.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank everyone who participated for your time and for your thoughtful comments. We really did cover a lot of information and material, and it's always interesting to hear the perspectives of others, especially when you have a complex issue. I think our time was well spent here and we were productive. So nothing but a big thank you, and I call this meeting adjourned.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Good job.
Good night, everyone.
Enjoy your summer. Or see you Saturday, whichever comes first. Where do I get off this thing? There we go.